Grace and peace from God our Father and the Lord and Savior Jesus the Christ. Amen. It's good to be coming at you here today. I'm actually not going to be in church. I'm in church right now, but I'm taking a Sunday off. Shanette and I are going to Florida to the Villages, visit my sister, Margie, and her husband, Tom. And I was counting up. I've been here 33, I'm not complaining, but I was here 33 Sundays in a row since our trip to the Philippines. So I think I needed a break. But actually, I just wanted to point out, these will be gone by this Sunday, but we had the blessing of the quilts on the 21st, and I think the ladies did 10 or so, and you probably see them a little bit in the background here, but that's just another one of our wonderful ministries that we have here at Selbu Lutheran Church. So for those of you sitting in the pews, I see you out there. I know where you sit. You're probably Scotty over there and Steve and sisters and everybody. So greetings to folks, and not especially, but also to our online congregation. So we're going to talk about humility. I remember when I was in Prescott, I was there from 78, Prescott, Arizona, to 88. It was one of our young men who would sing. We had a talent show every year, and he would sing a song that was popular in the late 70s. It was called, "Oh Lord, it's hard to be humble when you're perfect in every way. You know, I can't wait to look in the mirror. I get better looking each day." That's as far as I'm going to go with that. But it was a crazy song that was a parody, I guess. But I would say most of us here at the church, see you out there, or watching, it's not something that we struggle with. Many of us are very humble. We tend to be maybe more humble than we need to be. And in the sermon today, I'm going to try to make the distinction between true humility and, on the other hand, just putting ourselves down. That's not really humbleness. So we'll start with a story. I think it's kind of cute. I think I told it once before. But it was a lion. Okay, he was very proud, and he was king of the jungle, you know. So he proudly goes to the bear and says, "Who is the king of the jungle?" The lion asks, and the bear, trembling, says, Why, you are, of course, Mr. Lion." The lion gave a roar of approval. And then he went to the tiger, and he said, "Tiger, who's the king of the jungle?" And the tiger quickly replied, "Everyone knows that you are the king of the jungle, Mr. Lion." And once again, the lion roared with pride. Next on the list was the elephant. The lion boldly faced the elephant and addressed his question, "Who is king of the jungle?" The elephant immediately grabbed the lion with his trunk, whirled him around the air, slammed him against a tree, and pounded him onto the ground, and finally threw him onto the shore. And the lion, who was bruised and badly beaten, struggled to his feet, and he looked at the elephant and said, "Hey, just because you didn't know the answer to the question, it's no reason for you to get upset about it." It's kind of cute, kind of fun. And the moral of the story was the elephant was not being honestly respectful of the king of the jungle, the lion. And maybe the secondary meaning of the story was, although this is a funny story, we've all known people, maybe not so much ourselves, but we've known people, you know, my brother, my uncle, my so-and-so, who in a sense proudly strut around as arrogant kings and royalties, roaring and behaving as if they are the king of the jungle. So in the Bible, Jesus speaks about this, and he talks about being honestly respectful, or another way to put it, to be humble. Jesus said, "Whoever is least and humbles himself will be exalted, and the one who is exalted will be humbled." So it's good to ask, what is Jesus really saying? He's speaking to the religious folks of his time and saying that of all the things that they did to make themselves look important, they widened their phylacteries, they prayed publicly to be noticed, sit at places of honor, called by special titles. That was not the answer. Well, I didn't really pronounce it well, but did you catch that word, phylactery? Last Sunday, I brought out two words, the pericope and adiaphora. Pericope is really the assigned lessons, the lectionary 3-year cycle. And I told you my friend Denny Wigman, the lifelong chemist, calls me on Saturday night and said he's from the International Pericope Committee because I don't always follow their pericope, but then adiaphora as a repeat. There are things that are not central to salvation in a sense, but some of the side issues in Christianity. But anyway, phylactery. Do you know what that is? You know what a phylactery is? Well, I didn't either. In Jewish practice, it was one of two small black leather cube-shaped cases containing the text of the Torah. That's what the Jewish people called the scriptures, the Torah, the Old Testament, for the most part, as we know it now. And in accordance with Deuteronomy 6, verse 8, and other statements, especially in Deuteronomy and also in Exodus, they are to be worn by the male Jews, 13 of age or older, as reminders of God. So, in today's world, a little bit like carrying around a Bible. Or we can do, there's a couple ways to carry around the Bible. We can do it arrogantly, strut a little bit, and always have our Bible there to show off, to impress, I'm going to pick on somebody, to impress our Baptist friends, or you can pick on anybody, but seriously, there's a couple ways to carry around your Bible. One would be to show off, and one would be because you really want the Word of God available and handy to you. I was talking after the service on the 21st to Bob Logston, and he had gone to the funeral service out in Hooper of Keith Danielson, who was a cowboy, and Bob told me, he said, Keith went to seminary. And when he graduated from seminary, he decided he wanted to be a cowboy. And I didn't really know Keith. I've seen him because of his famous mustache, big mustache, kind of a Sam Elliott kind of mustache, I think. He became a cowboy. And he said, I don't know if he was buried that way, but he wanted to have a saddle and he wanted to have his Bible. And he knew the Bible. The Bible was well worn. And I would say that wasn't like the Jewish young men showing off their phylactery like, hey, I'm a good Jew here with my Torah in my pocket. But from what Bob shared with me about Keith, was he was a true believer. He was a cowboy, thick and thin. And that impressed me. I always thought I'd be a cowboy. I'll pick on my friend Wigman again. He said, Cross, here's the deal. Your face is too fat and you smile too much. he says cowboys have that little more serious look. Again, like a Sam Elliott, or if you ever watched Tombstone, those cowboys aren't, joking around like me. So, but this Keith, apparently he was a real cowboy. And sadly, he passed on young at 62. And they had quite a service out there in Hooper. So, was Jesus fighting the religious establishment of his time just because he wanted to be a rebel? Jesus wanted to be a rebel? And the answer would be no. Jesus is challenging them. He's challenging them to be real, to be authentic, and lead from the heart. The law was the most important thing for the Jews during Jesus' time. It was the most exalted thing. The law is important. I was telling somebody after church last Sunday that I've watched a few reruns. My brother Glenn laughs at me, but when I was in high school, the show The Fugitive was on. It started in 1963, and it ended in 67 in August, right about when I was starting college back there in Ohio. But basically, there was a movie called The Fugitive with, I think, Harrison Ford and Tommy Lee Jones, I think. But Richard Kimball in The Fugitive was a doctor who was falsely accused of killing his wife. And for 4 years, you see Dr. Kimball, who was David Jansen, traveling the country in all these adventures, almost getting caught, and the hated Lieutenant Philip Gerard was always there looking for him. And finally, in the end, he found the one-armed man who was the man who killed his wife. There are a lot of twists and turns at the end, but that showing of that was two parts. It was called Judgment Part 1 and 2. Had 78 million views. Can you imagine that? 78 million views. Most they ever had on TV till MASH ended. And I wasn't a big MASH watcher. But another old-time story for me is I watched Kitty and Matt Dillon for 20 years, and which ended in 75. And so The Fugitive was already over. Why didn't they have a final scene where Kitty and Matt go off into the sunset, go up into Wyoming? But they just ended it. But anyway, that's the way it goes sometimes. But back to this idea I was trying to get at was Gerard, who I think kind of knew that Richard Kimball was innocent. When asked, he says, "It doesn't matter what I think. The law called him guilty. 12 juries found him guilty. That's the law." Now, the law is good. Without law and order, we see in our streets of the United States, without some basic law, a lot of the criminals, the criminality is done by the same people over and over and over again because we're afraid to keep them in jail or reasons that I don't fully understand. The law is important, but sometimes, and I remember in one of these fugitives, they said, this sheriff, he says he does the letter of the law, but not the spirit of the law. I think back to the Jews, Jesus wanted them to go along with the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law, like I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm perfect, I'm doing this, and with no humility whatsoever. This is a true story. It goes back to 1986. You maybe remember this. It's 20 years ago or so now, but two ships collided in the Black Sea off the coast of Russia. Hundreds of passengers died as they were hurled into the icy waters below. News of the disaster was further darkened when an investigation revealed the cause of the accident. It wasn't a technology problem like radar or anything like that, or even thick fog. The cause was human stubbornness. This is a true story. Human stubbornness. The captains, both of whom were aware of the other ship's presence, either one could have steered clear, but it was a little bit like a chicken fight, like you used to have in my little hometown. They'd have these hot rod cars, and they'd go at each other, and then one would be chicken, go off. Well, when they decided it's time to call chicken, it was too late because those big ships don't turn that fast, and they collided, and hundreds of people died. That was the opposite of humility. That was arrogance that killed people. So we don't want to live that way. Another way to be honestly respectful, it's like what Jesus means, putting others first. This can be hard for us as well. It's a very common reaction to say, but what about me? The problem is that as a church, we need to be continually thinking about what can I do to help other people? We are meant to be the hands and the feet of Jesus. That's really what we're called to do in this life. And thirdly, being honestly respectful or being humble is what Jesus means by being obedient to God. And that can be hard as well. For Jesus, he humbled himself not by just becoming one of us, which he did, but becoming obedient to the will of God, although that obedience, of course, led to his death. And for us, it may not be a call to die, but we are called to humility in obedience to God, whatever that means in our lives. We've run into the opposite of humility or the opposite of being honestly respectful of children. We get these letters at the end of the year, not so many now with the cost of postage, and people are on Facebook and Instagram. But back in the day, this one family, it's kind of like their own child potty trained himself at 6 months, slept through the night after the first week. The advanced nursery class, they speak 5 languages before high school, things like that. And so this family, just for fun, put out a spoof. And they said, well, our daughter found the cure for cancer and colds. And our daughter's husband cured diabetes. And they were voted the family of the year by Time Magazine and on and on. Well, they fessed up. Of course, that was all a stretch. But people got a chuckle out of that. I mean, it's wonderful. Like around here, we've got some incredible kids. People on Facebook and things tell about our children, and that's fantastic. But I think we all know that behind that veneer, every family has its problems and challenges, and it's okay. How many of you remember Walter Cronkite? This is Walter Cronkite. I can't do my Cronkite, but he was like one of the most beloved newscaster, and he was a pretty good guy, I guess. I don't really know, but like anybody who's popular, sometimes he could be a little full of himself. Well, this is a story he told about himself. He said, there we were, sailing back down the Mystic River in Connecticut and following the channel's tricky turns through an expanse of shallow water. I'm reminded at this time there was a boat full of young people who sped fastest going the other direction, and its occupants were waving their arms. And finally, my wife said, "Walter, do you know what they were shouting?" "Why, honey, of course." They were shouting, "Hello, Walter, hello, Walter." And she said, "No, honey, they were shouting, shallow water, warning them." And so this was a joke he told on himself. Everybody knows who Walter Cronkite is, but they were just telling him, "You're not going to make it through this shallow rapid on up ahead." So we're trying to be humble, trying to be respectful. Here's an interesting quote that I came across. "Pride is so subtle that if we aren't careful, we'll be proud of our humility." And then, think about that. Pride is so subtle that if we aren't careful, we're going to be proud of our humility. I am very humble. And I'm proud that I'm humble, that kind of a thing. Kind of a funny story here. And this again could show how the whole race thing, you could go either way, or you could be super sensitive or not. But many of you have heard of Booker T. Washington. He was a great man. He was a renowned black educator. He was an outstanding example. Shortly after he became the president of Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, so big job, he was walking in an exclusive area there in Alabama. And there was this lady, a wealthy woman, and she saw Booker T. Washington down there and said, Sir, could you help me? You want to earn a few bucks? Could you help me cut some wood?" And so he was a servant kind of guy, Booker T. Washington. He had no pressing business. Professor Washington smiled. He rolled up his sleeves, proceeded to the humble chore that she had requested. And when he was finished, he carried the logs into the house and stacked them up against the fireplace. A little girl recognized him and later revealed his identity to the lady. Well, the next day, the lady, you can imagine, was so embarrassed that she went immediately to see Mr. Washington and says, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." And here's the humility for Booker T. Washington, very highly educated man. "It's perfectly all right, ma'am," he replied. "Occasionally, I enjoy a little manual labor. Besides, it's always a delight to help somebody I see as a friend." That's class. That's humility. That's what Jesus wants us to do. I think in our world today, people are so tied up into identity and class, and at least this is how I read the Bible. Jesus sees us as an individual. He doesn't see any color of our skin, any slang or lack thereof. And speaking of slang, I grew up in Ohio, and I thought we were the only people in the world who talked right, the way we talk. And then, of course, I went south, and I went west, and I went here and there, and everybody does it a little differently, so that's okay. I think it was Patty who's going to read today, or has read from Philippians. "Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit. Let each of you look not to his own interests, but also to the interests of others." And then later, "Who, though he was in the form of God," Jesus, of course, "did not count equality of God to be a thing, but he emptied himself." Jesus emptied himself, took the form of a servant. And then at the end of that, he said, "So that at every name, every knee should bow, every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father." And Paul here, in writing that, was trying to help the Philippian church be of the same heart and mind when it came to Jesus. There was told several stories here as I'm doing this, but this is an Abraham Lincoln story, that Lincoln once got caught in a situation where he was trying to please a politician, so he issued a command to transfer certain regiments. And when the Secretary of War, who was a good man, Edward Stanton, received this order, he refused to carry it out. He said that the president was a fool. Now, who can get away with this now? Lincoln was told what Stanton said, and he replied, "If Stanton said I'm a fool, then I must be, for he is nearly always right. I'll see for myself." So the two men talked. The president quickly realized that his decision was a serious mistake, and without hesitation, he withdrew it. I would say that Abe Lincoln, one of our great presidents, was honestly respectful. And again, I wish we had more of that in our leadership, not only in this country, but around the world, where so many people see themselves as the king of the world, the lion. So the Apostle Paul, just to repeat quickly, said in verses 3 and 4, do nothing from selfish ambition, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. So the big question is, how do we do that? According to the Greek, by the way, being honestly respectful means having a humble opinion of oneself, a deep sense of one's moral littleness, modesty, lowliness of mind. How many of you have ever heard of the Morse Code? I think most of us have. We've seen it, certainly in movies we've seen, but there's a story about the famous inventor, Samuel Morse, who was once asked if he encountered situations where he didn't know what to do. Morse responded, more than once. And when I could not see my way clearly, I knelt down and prayed to God for light and understanding. Morse received many honors from his invention of the telegraph, but he felt undeserving. He said, I have made a valuable application of electricity, not because I was superior to other people, but solely because God, who meant it for us to have and enjoy, had to reveal it to someone, and he was pleased to reveal it to me. That's humility. That's being honestly respectful. And one other story, and I'm about done here, but Cal Ripken Jr., how many of you remember Cal Ripken Jr.? He had the record, 2,362 games. I said I preached here. Well, I've actually preached here probably over 100 times because when I'm gone, I leave one, but 33 Sundays in a row. Well, that's not much compared to 2,362 baseball games. That was 17 years he didn't miss a game. And it was interesting because after that, he was interviewed and he said, what was your greatest accomplishment in all those years? And he said quickly, I caught the last out at the World Series. And when he was asked further about that, he says, it wasn't a great catch. I didn't dive. I didn't do a cartwheel and throw the guy out at first base. People's mouths didn't drop when I made the catch. But I knew I was part of something big. We won the World Series. Everybody had their responsibility. Every pitcher, catcher, all the fielders had their own. I happened to make the last catch, and of that, I was proud. I've told you this story before, but when I was doing consulting, one of the towns I worked in was Jamestown, North Dakota. Patty, if you're here, well, I know you read today, so Patty, Jamestown, you know where that is. And there was a woman there, her name was Dorothy Erstad, and she was on my committee on our spiritual life. And she said, I said, you might consider doing prayer booklet. And she says, well, how many do people usually do? I said, well, some churches struggle to get 10. One time, I think we had 50. And she looked at me and says, I'll get 100. And I remember when I thought to myself, we'll see how this Erstad does at 100. Well, she got 105 faith stories in that booklet, the most I ever had in 15 years of being a consultant. And later I found out she was the mother of Darren Erstad, who once batted .352 for the season. He made the final out on a catch against the San Francisco Giants. He played for the Angels, I think. He made the final catch, remind me of Carl Ripken Jr., and they won the World Series. So they have a big sign they're used to coming into Jamestown, home of Darren Erstad, who I got to meet one time when I was there. But again, these are all examples of being humble, being honestly respectful. So finally, when Jesus talked in Luke 22, they had that Passover dinner together. And this in some ways was shocking to me, but in the other ways, thinking about human nature, yeah, I can understand that. Jesus had said that they would all fall away from him, and Peter would deny him. Nobody believed that. Of course, Peter soon after denied him. But they were talking later about Jesus, and the argument that they had was, I wonder when Jesus is gone, who will be at his right hand and who will be at his left hand? In other words, these disciples who had walked with Jesus, seen everything, they were thinking, which one of us is going to be elevated the most? And yes, I understand that. That's the way broken life is. And we see it in the Bible. And I think it's a great, great understanding about human nature and about Jesus himself. At the beginning, I said I'd try to make the distinction between honest humility, and hopefully I've given a lot of examples here, primarily Jesus, the Apostle Paul, who called himself the least of all, who became one of the great writers of the New Testament. And I oppose that with just putting ourselves down. So please, if you're one of these people that will say to yourself, I'm too dumb, I can't do that. Or, we've seen children, I'm not able to do that. Remember, that's not humility. That's just sometimes looking down on ourselves. And if we feel that way, we need to be exalted a little bit and know that we do the best we can. But being humble is doing the best job that we can, being faithful people, and knowing that God is present. So thank you for listening, everybody. God bless you, and see you next week.